We are about to continue the faith through time and the different theories and such. It is now, well, we're now on what I would call fae time. It's the pastimes of the fairies, apparently. And obviously, different beliefs say different things, but they undertake all sorts of activities, some actually quite associated with humans. They enjoy music, riding horses, dancing, playing games. Some of those games, by the way, are throwing rocks at humans. They grow their own food, they hold markets and festivals, they own animals, and they make use of even wild animals. They dig mines. One of their favourite pastimes is apparently feasting, having big feasts. The crafts that you'll find they enjoy is weaving, as in the old-fashioned weaving seen in Viking times, spinning, which more or less the same but different. Get what I mean? Cooking, baking, metalwork, leatherwork, tailoring, and boat building. That's my dog having a flap. His mush. The boat building is one of the things that apparently the Vikings got their knowledge from, was the Fae for the boats. Not that they actually built the boats, but the inspiration and ideas they helped and such. Sometimes they will help complete humans' work. They do this at night and should not be interfered with or even shown gratitude. If presented with a garment, many fae will just leave. They'll go away and they'll not work again. This is sort of a way to get rid of them, to make them go away. They will go away if you offer them clothes and such. So that's the kind of, towards that would be a way of getting rid of them. However, remember, it's hard for them to find work. So, if you do have one working for you, it's not such a bad thing. It's because it's hard for them to actually find work in general. It's the fairy women that are great weavers and spinners. They do actually like ball games and often played in Ireland, as you said. Football and hurling are popular among the Fae in Ireland. The chief indoor game in which the heroic fairies engaged in is chess, but they also played cards and dice. The following story was told by William of Newbridge in the early 13th century. A peasant of this town went once to see a friend who lived in the next town, and it was late at night when he was coming back, not very sober, when, from the adjoining borough, which I have often seen, and which is not much over a quarter of a mile from the town, he heard the voices of people singing, and, as it were, joyfully feasting. He seemed to be very curious and wondered who they could be that were breaking into that place. That's what he assumed anyway. By their merriment, the silence of the dead night, he wished to examine into this matter more. He wanted to see more closely. So, finding a door open in the side of the burrow, he went up to it and looked in, and there beheld a large, very large, luminous, it says, so imagine that be glowing, area full of women and men. And they were having some sort of banquet. One of the attendants, seeing him standing at the door, offered him a cup. He took it, but would not drink. he poured out its contents, but he kept the vessel. This is because it was an actual beautiful vessel that he wished to take home. A great tumult arose at the banquet. An account of taking away the cup, or the great, it says, he was greatly pursued by many for taking the cup, which is odd because they gave him it, and he poured it out and he was taking the cup away with him. So I guess they didn't like that. They didn't like him taking the cup. It was a form of stealing, I suppose. So anyway, he was pursued, but he escaped. I wonder if he still has it. It's very interesting. Or where it went. Well, that's just a small story, but I just found it interesting because if he took the cup and he got away with it and he escaped and nothing happened, then I wonder where it went, the actual cup. Fairies are renowned for their love of music, and they often kidnapped musicians, the pipers and the harpers. They would keep them overnight to perform at their dances or their banquets, whatever they were having at the time. Usually, a payment for a job well done was a haunting melody in which to take back and compose, so to speak. So they would give the person music, to which the person would then come back to this realm, and that music he would be allowed to keep, and it would be a haunting melody, but it would definitely make money. Fairy music sometimes is heard at night, especially between midnight and dawn. Sometimes the music comes from fairy mounds, but often the source was invisible and seemed to come from all directions at once. Fairy music was never sombre, but always made the body sway and dance. There are many stories of how fairy music so possessed a human that they were unable to stop dancing, and obviously because of that they perished, it is believed. Not a belief by all, but in some of the tales, it is said. There is obviously, they would say, there was, should I say, favourite musical instrument of the fae, which was the bagpipes and obviously the harp. Music by pipe and flute is very common among the fae. Sometimes the fairies played marching music with pipes, cymbals, and tambourines. From the 16th century onwards, there are constant references to fairies as dancers. One of the most common activities of trooping fairies is to go, they would basically go on rides and processions. Now, it does the kind of rides it states, it doesn't actually state what kind of rides it was. So I suppose it would depend on the time. Would it be their rides? Would it be fairground rides? It doesn't actually state. In tradition, ballads that relate to the fae, the fairy ride, takes a prominent role. This procession took place on the coming of summer, when hordes of fairies would ride accompanied by music and singing. That kind of ride means riding horses or, animals, and it represents the coming of summer. It usually starts on the 1st of May. So remember, when you're out and about, if you hear such music and you cannot find where it's coming from, there may be trooping fae nearby passing through. Trooping fae basically means a colony of fairies. You will see trooping fae in the Seelie and the Unseelie because they tend to go in groups and not alone. Sex and marriage of fairies. So the motif of the fairy mistress as an ancient traditional stretching throughout different areas and cultures. In the Welsh tale known as Lini Fonfash, A Lady of the Lake tale. A girl who rises out of the lake agrees to marry a local young man on one condition, that he will not hit her 3 times. He does hit her 3 times and she disappears back into the lake. It's a very common story. Many stories of fairyland, they sort of centre on this ravishingly beautiful woman, and it's almost always a woman, who will steal away a brilliant poet or a most handsome man from this world, and she will then make him, of course, her lover. However, I think it's well known that they don't really settle, do they? Irish tales, the fairy mistress called to her chosen lover through dreams that haunted him until he sought her out, living on a charmed island or beneath an ancient mound. Once he had tasted her charms, the man rarely attempts to leave her. However, fairies are very fickle, so sometimes a fairy woman discards a human husband and sends him back. When this happens, or if he escapes and chooses to go back, the man may return to find his home isn't the same, as centuries have passed in the blink of an eye. Even if this doesn't happen, the man usually pines so much that he dies, and that'd be soon after his return too. Occasionally, with the Thomas the Rhymer story, he would survive and then be able to return to his fairy lover. But those stories are not as prominent as the stories saying that they just simply wither away and die. I mean, in many tales, fairies have casual sexual relationships with mortals or other fairies. And some fairies are said to even rape women who spy on them, though most of the time they mesmerize them. They will mesmerize women to stop them from resisting. The lovemaking of a fairy woman is so intense that few men can survive. Those who do pine and die. Some can be wooed into becoming mistresses, but only if the man keeps their secrets and agrees to certain conditions. Other stories of sex between humans and fairies often referred to the fairy as an incubus. This word did not have demonic connections until the late Middle Ages. As spirits interested in fertility, fairies are sympathetic with lovers and punish girls who are, well, yeah, they disregard, yeah, you know what I mean. So they don't usually like those that do too much of that stuff with many different people. It's something that they just don't agree with, I guess. Occasionally, a human man can take a fairy woman for his wife. This usually happens because he kidnaps her. The marriage is very seldomly happy, obviously. Usually, the wife returns to her people and abandons her husband, and she also abandons any children, though the children can inherit some of the mother's power, and often the mothers can come back and give them gifts too. Inspired tale of John Keats' poem La Belle dans Sans Merci, 1819, about a fairy who condemns a knight to an unpleasant fate after she seduces him with her eyes and her singing. But bear in mind that poems back then, the way that they're read, are not the same as how they are read today. So when you read poems from back then, they can sound quite different. Oh, what can ail thee, night at arms, alone and palely loitering? The sedge has withered from the lake, and no birds sing. Oh, what can ail thee, night at arms? So haggard and so woe begone, the squirrel's granary is full, and the harvest's done. I see a lily on thy brow, with anguish moist and fever drawn, and on thy cheeks a fading rose, fast weareth too. I made a garland for her head, and bracelets too, and fragrant zone. She looked at me as she did love, and made sweet moan. I set her on my pacing steed, and nothing else so all day long, for sidelong would she bend and sing a fairy's song. She found me roots of relish sweet, and honey wild, and manna dew, and sure in language strange she said, I love thee true. She took me to the elfin grot, and there she wept and sighed full sore, and there I shut her wild eyes with kisses for. As you can see, it's a bit odd. And there she followed me asleep, and there I dreamed, woe betide, the latest dream I ever dreamt, on a cold hillside. I saw pale kings, and princes too, pale warriors, death pale were they all. They cried, La belle donne sans mari hath thee in thrall. I saw their starved lips in the gloom, with horrid warning gaped wide, and I awake and found me here on the cold hillside. And this is why I so mourn here, alone and palely loitering, through the sedges withered from the lake, and no birds sing. And yeah, that's the poem. Now, there's a few versions of it, of course, so it's not going to be the only version out there, but that's about obviously a knight falling in love with a fairy woman and it not going so well, which can happen. When fairies go into fight and battle, they are considered immortal, so their battles are more like sporting events. Irish fairies in particular were said to travel across land to battle, obviously at night. They would go through the day or at dawn, but they would battle at night, carrying the wounded home at dawn again. It says that flesh and lake, flesh or phlegm-like substances, found on bushes in early morning were believed to be the fairies' blood, like ectoplasm. Ghost hunters would think this was from a ghost. However, it wasn't red because, as you know, neither is ours. Only when oxygenated. Well, theirs is more pale, like plant blood, very pale green greyish colour, because they are obviously built essentially like plants, DNA wise anyway. So when fairies bleed, it's not red. I mean, ours would not be red. It's only when it hits the air, when it gets oxygenated, is it red. Otherwise, it would be blue when it's deoxygenated, hence why we have veins that are blue and our blood that is red. It's only red because it's the air, remember. Now, it says that they would often want to have battle with humans. They would only choose to fight them because, obviously, fighting a human, they know that they're going to definitely win. So even though they were fierce warriors and they enjoyed fighting, they did actually prefer to fight people because that way they just won and they knew that they were going to win. Many people have reported seeing fairies drilling the bodies of soldiers. On the Isle of Man, a man saw an army dressed in red. In another case, two men met a fairy on the road This was at Mull. They were all dressed in red caps and coats. Some mounted on horses and some on foot. They so filled the highway that the man had to climb over the edge and wait for them to pass. In the mid-18th century, on Mellow Moor, near Blackburn, fairies were often said to appear as soldiers. In the Lochore side, in I think it's Argyll or Shepherda, something like that. I know the Argyll and it says Lochore side, but I'm not sure about the Shepherd's Hill. I don't think it were ever called that, but it's because a shepherd was there, but I don't know. A shepherd saw a cave, and it was in a rock face. He put his knife into a gap in the rock and saw what was a collection of weapons, guns, and swords. He turned and ran to grab a runaway sheep, but when he turned back, all he saw was a bare rock. So, yeah, what I was saying about the name, it's Lochore side in Argyll, but it's been said to have the known name as Shepherd's Hill because of the shepherds that tended their sheep. But it was a shepherd that actually saw the weapons in the stone face and such, but when he turned away, lo and behold, they had actually vanished completely. So I'm going to leave it there for now because that's like just coming up to 22 minutes. And I know they're all long, but they're all going to be long because there's so much to get through. Thank you for listening. Love and light. Regarding fairy cups, they are usually quite lavish, made from gold, even horns, also with like jewels or gems on them. There's many stories regarding fae offering humans a drink from the cup and the liquid being corrosive. 17th century Scottish folk tale of a man who sees a whirlwind in a field and hears voices saying horse and haddock. He repeats the saying and is whipped up by the wind. He wakes up the next day in the King of France's cellar with a silver cup in his hand and no idea how he got there. There's a tale of Jewess of Tilbury in a forest in Gloucester. It's said there's a mount. This little mount actually rises to a point and is the height of a man. And this is where knights and hunters were sort of, it was used to ascend, basically ascend them. They would seek relief for their wants. Whoever ascends the mount must leave his companions and go quite alone. When alone, he was to say, as if speaking to some other person, I thirst and immed. Lately, I thirst. I don't know what that means, but anyway, apparently, a cup would appear and the bearer would be an elegant lady in a dress. She would be very cheerful, and she would offer him the cup, stretching her hand out with a large drinking horn adorned with gold and sometimes gems. This was custom amongst most ancient English, apparently. It was something that was done quite regular. In the cup, nectar of an unknown source, but it was the most delicious flavour ever presented within the cup. And when it was drunk, apparently, all hurt, heat, and weariness fled from the glowing body, so that one would be thought ready to undertake his trials, etc., instead of being taken over by toils. Basically, I think that what that means is Within the cup was obviously an unknown liquor, but whatever it was, it tasted divine. And when the lady gave this to the person, it says glowing body, so I would assume sort of aura or spirit, that it cleansed the spirit, so that they could take on any toil, or misfortune, or that would leave the body, almost like having an aura cleanse. That's what that sounds like to me, rather than a body cleanse, because the glowing body would suggest more of a spiritual sort of factor about it, I think. When the nectar was taken, the servant would then present a towel to the drinker to wipe their mouth with. Having performed his office, he waited neither for I don't know what that means. He waited neither for recompense for his services nor for questions and inquiry. See, that don't make any sense to me. Presented a towel to the drinker to wipe his mouth with, and then, having performed his office, he waited neither for recompense for his services nor for questions and inquiry. That's very odd. That's how it's translated, so, and this is what I'm saying, sometimes it translates very odd and I don't understand it. So this apparently was frequent daily action, and it was done for a very long period of the old times, and had taken place among ancient people until one day, apparently at night, the city went hunting. And what it means is, I would imagine it means the men of the city went hunting out in the forest. Now, the main one up front called for a drink and had gotten the horn, but he did not return the horn to the cupbearer as all others had done previously. Apparently, there's illustrations. The Earl of Gloucester, when he learned the truth, he condemned the robber to death. I've not seen any illustrations, but I'll look for them. But yeah, the Earl of Gloucester, when he heard that this person had stolen the cup, not returned it, he did condemn him to death because it was technically stealing. Fairy wands. They've long been a powerful symbol, thousands of years, since at least the 14th century. They had symbolised and conveyed some sort of magic power. Wands are not mentioned much in traditional British folklore, but they do appear in Breton Tale. A white fairy wand is used to enter fairyland. The thing is with the wands, it's not really a British thing. It's more a fancy thing, a way of learning to direct energy before we stop using these tools. But remember, the tools are simply there to aid us in visualization and where to direct energy. But once you've got that, and once you know what to do with it, you really do not need the tools. There's Italian tales of the late Middle Ages where fairies do bear wands, and ones associated with fairies also by Thomas Sud, that was 1820s, that fairies have broke their wands. It's I don't know if anybody's read it, but fairies have broke their wands and wishing have lost its power. That's what was wrote. A magic wand or staff is associated with inducing invisibility. That is also a fairy power. The wand become more noticeable, I guess, in the late 19th century because of, obviously, if you think about it, the stories and all the children's books. It then put the wand with the fae, and it usually depicts it as a little star, doesn't it? When used, wands are held in the right hand. The most common size for a wand is around 18 inches in length, sometimes a little less than an inch thick. but that's just not exactly fact. It's more of myth. And when, you know, in the in the 19th centuries, when it started to become more popularized that fairies had wands, it was never an original thing, and it was never really spoke about or anything like that. It's just, I guess it's one of those things that now you would see it and it wouldn't surprise you, and it would be almost like it was meant to be, but back then it would be very odd, you know. It didn't come about just like that. It took time to accumulate and ended up more so in children's stories, and is actually not factual of the fae at all. Fairies and cleaning, bathing, etc. Fairies are extremely clean, actually, even though people think the opposite. They get annoyed at dirty or untidy houses. They will or can punish those who do not clean up after themselves. They may wash in any liquid they find available, including pans of water set aside for cooking. That's what they traditionally would do, because traditionally fresh water was left out in front of a fire for them, which they would pay with a few silver coins. Welsh fairies would use water that human children had already bathed in, bathing their children in it. Highland fairies, they liked the water used for washing men's feet. It is said, obviously it's not a fact, but more of sort of like a myth type deal. The tale of the grubby fisherman, the Isle of Man, who was forcibly washed by fairies after he noticed them swinging on gorse bushes. In Cornwall, there is a story of Betty Stoggs and her husband. Both drunks didn't take care of themselves, their home, and their baby. Pixies removed their baby from the home, washed the baby's clothes, and left the baby near the cottage covered in flowers. In Argyll, fairies washed a stolen child in milk left out for them. The milk was thrown away by the farmer the next morning, but his sheepdog found it, lapped it up, and it died. Two girls, this is in Tavistock, I think it's that, forgot to put a bucket of water out for the pixies one night. The pixies entered the girls' room that night through the keyhole and surrounded their bed, arguing about the best punishments for their neglect. They considered pinching, obviously, and stealing their best clothes, sending toothache, or inflicting a red nose. One girl heard them and wanted to get up and put things right. The other girl refused. The first girl absolutely decided to get up and fill the bucket and put it where it should be. She was rewarded with silver pennies, while the other was lamed for being rude. Interesting, isn't it? Being lamed. I wonder what reference that refers to, because it might not actually mean what we perceive it to mean, I suppose. Fairies don't particularly like bad smells either. This is why it's said that stale urine in the past was kept for cleaning human clothes, was to keep them away. They would, they would put stale urine on their clothes to keep the fae away, because apparently they don't like the smell. Interesting. Claymore, near Kettleness, Yorkshire, was a place fairies washed their clothes, and also at the River Tees, the Isle of Man, a spot called the Fairy Ground near Gretch River, where the fairy maids dressed in red and were seen washing their babies. In a bathing spa, Kitts Ilkley, the caretaker arrived to open up and found the key simply rotated in the lock with no effect. He tried to push the door open, but felt resistance. When he finally forced his way in, he saw numerous little creatures, all dressed in green, less than 18 inches tall, it is said, chatting unintelligibly, with all their clothes on, but in the spa area, the bathing area of the spa. It is believed, of course. Just a tale, I'm not sure how true it is. Trees, relationships with plants, etc. Fairies and their relationships to them. Nearly all trees have some sacred association from very early times. Some are regarded as being strong associated with the fairies, who hold them sacred for that reason. It's best to avoid those trees at night, especially ash, hazel, hawthorn, alder and oak, which are their favourites. If you venture too close without respect, you could find yourself pinched or hit and even tangled until morning. If you choose to cut any down, damage their trees, you will get a life full of bad luck. Hawthorn, also known as the wishing tree, is particularly sacred when it grows near fairy hills or in a ring of 3 or more hawthorns. The Irish called it the fairy bush because of the beliefs that fairy spirits lived within it, acting as guardians. Cutting or damaging a hawthorn tree will definitely offend the fairies, and more than likely it will be severe punishment for doing things like that. If you find an oak, ash and a hawthorn, and these trees are all growing together in particular, it's extremely powerful. Growing these sort of trees, you can actually grow them yourself, and if you grow them in 3 like that, the reason they are powerful is because they're meant to represent the 3 realms: the underworld, Middle Earth and Upper Earth, or obviously Earth world, middle, upper and lower. Depends how you do it. Some people say lower earth, middle earth, upper earth, and others will say underworld, middle earth, upper earth, but they also say upper world, middle world, lower world. So if a twig is taken from each and bound together with red thread, this acts as protection at night against spirits. That's if you want protection from spirits, of course. 1999. A famous fairy thorn tree in County Clare gained worldwide attention when a campaign came about to have a road redirected to go around the area. Otherwise, it would have gone straight over the grave of the tree. Fairy trees stand out because they grow central of a field and at the side of a road. Some have stones surrounded at the base of it. This is believed to be that the stones are put there for a form of protection. It's the way that they are guarding the trees when they are not around. Excuse me. We look at foxgloves. They are liked by the fairies, and they will object to anybody abusing most plants, but particularly their favourite plants of all. You can plant foxgloves near your front door to invite fairies in, or carry a dried sprig to start seeing them and building a relationship. It is said that if you pick primroses, you're more likely to see fairies. They love roses. They love the scent and the old path, rose and thorn. They are extremely attracted to these and those who are of such path, because they know the correct ways of talking and treating them as should. Wearing rose or bathing in rose petals or rose oil, rose water is said to attract the fae, but to attract them you must go seek them. You can steep in rose petals in a copper basin, or obviously there really aren't many copper basins about nowadays. It's not like that, is it? The way they used to be. I remember being in a bath in when I was young. I remember being in a bath in front of coal fire. You can steep roses though in a copper kettle if you can, under a full moon, but you have to sort of leave them until the next full moon and then use that on yourself or in a bath to seek them out. The sweet scent of lilac. If you grow lilac within your garden, its sweet scent is said to attract the fae folk. To find an oak, ash and hawthorn, remember, is very, very valuable. Now, regarding that, I just want to go back to it a minute. You can, obviously, everybody knows that you're meant to ask before you take things from a tree anyway. Those particular trees, you can look for the ones that have fallen on the ground and take them. And I'm just going to put this forward before I go any further, because otherwise I'll forget, because I haven't wrote it down. It's just something that I remembered. Anyway, so if you take the 3 sprigs from each of those trees, right, we bind them. Don't bind them with red thread. Don't use red. It's best probably to bind them with green, and then you could take, for example, some roses, dried rose petals, foxgloves, dried or fresh, whatever you want, or even if you protect the 3 twigs that are binders so that you can put oil on them and such, your rose oil and that's a better way to attract the fae, because it's the 3 realms and then you're adding the plants to it too. And it's really good if you can actually get 3 of the 3 twigs from the trees, bind them in green and put them in your garden, and then around them plant your roses, lilacs, foxgloves. That's a very, very good way of attracting the fae. It's not wrote down anywhere, but I just remember it from when I was younger. So I think it would probably still work, I'm sure. Thyme is also well known to attract fairies and is meant to aid in seeing them, yet people dismiss this common herb. It's very powerful actually regarding the fae. You can wear it daily and begin to see the sihi. Sprinkle it on windowsills and your door to bring them to your home. Heather is said to ignite fairy passion and open portals between their world and our own. Bluebells are said to attract fairies to dance in your garden. Clover is sacred to fairies and attracts them. Elderberry is used to make fairy wine. Obviously, we burn them on a flame usually. That attracts the fae too. Drinking elderberry wine is seeing the fairies, probably because you get too drunk. If you drink from the same goblet as a fairy, you will also begin to see the fairies. Yeah, if you can make your own elderberry wine, because the thing is, people generally go out and buy it, but what that actually means is make it oneself, because making it yourself, obviously, is a much better way of being able to sort of see them, because they prefer us to do it sort of that way, you know. Anything that's homemade they absolutely prefer than something that is just bought. Fairies and animals, as we know, have great communication. They are very well intimate with each other. Many fairies, especially in islands, they would ride horses a lot of the time. They had hounds, but their horses, they were said to be milk white, yet the Scottish fairies are said to ride on horses that were decked with very colourful varieties of different things hanging from them with bells. They're said to be very, very colourful. It's like bunting that they would have around the horses, and they'd have bells on. A variety of fairy dogs are used as watchdogs, hunting. Some have a cat. Guardians of the sihi courts are hounds. They are particularly strange looking because they can be on 2 legs, or 4. They can look part human. Their intelligence is immaculate. And they are definitely over 7 feet tall, maybe just under, maybe just over. They also have their own cattle and can sometimes offer them to humans. Fairy cows are harmless and they do not have any horns. They generally do have white ears or speckled red and tan all over, with still the white ears. They give large amounts of milk and birth twins. One form of fairy cattle called, well, that's a fairy cattle, but calamity meat, was an animal, a cow usually, that appeared to have died accidentally, but had been stolen by fairies. The fae left behind a piece of, obviously, the carcass, identical to the cow. It's believed that this meat should never be consumed because it's enchanted fairy meat, and by eating it, or the eating of any of that animal, then you kind of going into the unknown, and it was very strange and it shouldn't be done. Not only would it cause maybe for you to be taken by the fae, but it could also cause quite a lot of illness, and they call that calamity meat. And what that means is any cattle, especially cows, if they suddenly are not with the flock and they have died somewhere away from the flock, and when found there is a carcass, but there is no real explanation of how they died, like none whatsoever. It used to be blamed on the fae, and they would say, well, the real cow has been taken by the fae. This is not the real cow, and the carcass meat should not be touched because obviously it was said to cause illness, bad luck, or cause you to be taken by them. But who knows? Wealth of gold and treasure. Well-known golden fairy hoarders are leprechauns. It's said that to catch one will lead you to a pot of gold. Fairies have long been associated with buried treasure, just like dragons. Before banks came into being, hiding wealth under beds or burying it in fields was a common way of protecting money. Sometimes people did not reclaim it. Finding forgotten or abandoned treasure was possible for many centuries. A fairy may willingly lend someone and also may willingly lead someone to bury treasure. Sometimes they are known to just place it in front of people. At Bury Castle in Shropshire, it's said that the fairies have left a thin gold wire to guide treasure seekers to a pot of gold that they did bury. They may also bestow magical powers on an individual to detect buried treasure. It's common belief that fairies do hoard gold, though. It's a common, well, worldwide, I think. In Cornwall, it was believed that gold was concealed around ancient stone mounds and monuments, and that if you captured a piece of it, you could force disclosure of many more riches. It's also believed that if you could take out a glass jar, go to a monument and capture a pixie, you could force them to disclose their riches. Fairies often do protect hoards of treasure and attack humans who try to take their gold. Sometimes visions of fairy hoards of gold, or I suppose like a mirage, like in the desert, can be sent to a human as a fairy tease. So the vision mirage, you would see it there, but it's not like really there, I suppose. The Isle of Man, the fairies whispered to a man closing his shop, I believe, There's two tales to this, actually. I've just realised. There was one where he was closing a shop and they whispered about there being gold in a certain area, and he followed. This is the Isle of Man. He followed to find the gold, which was said to be somewhere in bedrock, but he was never seen again. The man just simply vanished. And then also the Isle of Man, there's the more common tale where the fairies whispered to a man that was on his sofa and he was sort of half asleep, half awake. And they whispered to him about hidden gold. He actually, apparently, in shock, fell to the floor, became ill for 6 months, then became lamed for the rest of his life. And also, like I said, we don't actually know what that word means, lamed. It could mean impotent for all we know, and I'm just saying. It doesn't necessarily mean that, they couldn't walk. It could mean it in other terms. It just depends. I mean, fairies are fairies. They work in mysterious ways. It has been reported in the past that fairies have lent money to the poor, although they can be tough when timely repayment isn't made. Fairies usually conduct a business by using a barter system. They've also been known to enter into contracts with humans for building work and such, obviously, and they will have set out and agreed on payment. However, sometimes they do not set the terms until after the event. They will do the work and then demand payment. They can sometimes be quite generous, for example, giving a life supply of gold or a purse that never empties. Later in some tales, the money would turn out to be shells, dead flowers, withered leaves, paper, or even horse dung, although in their own right, I don't believe that as not being wealthy, because in their own right they can all be used for a purpose and therefore are still rich. That's just my belief though. It may change from one thing to another. Sometimes it's been pebbles and then it's turned to gold, or leaves, and when they've got home it's turned to gold. But they don't always need a reason to bestow good fortune upon people. Sometimes it's just because they feel like it, other times they have a close connection to someone and decide to see what they'll do when given it. So we now get to a story. A man came across the fairies dancing on the beach at Buckuster Cove on the Isle of Wight. He joined the dance, but after a while he needed to rest. He sat on a puffball mushroom, but under his weight it burst, sprinkling gold dust all over. The fairies gave him some of this gold dust. Fairy money can be conditional upon discretion. As soon as the source of unexplained wealth is confessed, it is lost forever and cannot be regained. Fairy money can be a curse as well as a favour, and there are often hints that the fae had something to do with illegal coining, it is believed. But yeah, that fairy dust is interesting. Can you imagine that, sitting on a mushroom and it exploded into fairy dust? But it were gold. 1620. Susan Swapper in Rye, Sussex, was visited by 4 fairies at night. They told her to dig a pot of gold buried outside the town. She did as instructed, but failed to find the hoard. Susan later actually met the Fay Queen, it is believed. The Queen told her if she was prepared to make submission to her, she would never want for money for the rest of her life. Interesting thing to offer. A tale from Scotland. A girl was sitting by a well, spinning wool, and she looked into the water and saw a pot of gold beneath the surface. Marking the spot with her spindle, she ran to tell her father. He suspected it was Glamour intended to trap and drown her. When they returned together to the place, the area was covered, and I don't know what it actually means. because I couldn't translate the rest. So I'm not sure if it means you couldn't see, or it had been, I'm not sure. 12 men appeared dressed in green. They returned her original spindle with its wool all spun. So yeah, it says when they returned, the gold was covered, but it didn't say what it was covered by. And then it said that these 12 men appeared with the spindle, gave it back to her. So yeah, I'm not sure what it means by covered. I mean, I suppose it could mean a number of things, really. Let's look at the food and cups, etc. of the Fae. Fairies will commonly steal from humans, especially food, because their own food isn't as nourishing as ours, apparently. That's one thing that's said. They can steal in the guise of vermin, mice, rats. That's what some sources state. Yet other sources state fairies are vegetarian. Although they steal any sort of food, they particularly like butter and milk. To combat this, many charms were put in place to prevent them from stealing butter. They would put mullein leaves or holy water in the churn, and this apparently stopped the Fae from stealing it. I'm not sure about that, but that's apparently what happened. In Scottish folklore, fairies may simply carry away the goodness of the food, leaving behind basically crumbs. Crumbs that do not look so good either because they look dead. They can also take goodness out of cheese, so it floats in water like a cork. Fairies were reported to be gifted bakers. They were quite domestic fairies. They would bake small delicious cakes, and they would give these to their benefactors. But it's a well-known, that's why we have fairy cakes. I suppose it came from that kind of myth that fairy cakes, fairies were good at what they did at baking, etc. Many stories claim that although fairies' food seems delightful, it really is only twigs and pebbles with a glamour cast over it. A wide belief was that tuberculosis was caused by eating fairy food. That's back in the day, though. Obviously, we won't say that now. It was common in the past to leave food out for the fairies. A remnant of this belief, sorry guys, a remnant of this belief remains in some practices today, obviously. It's kind of like the food for Santa on Christmas Eve. Obviously, I don't believe in that stuff, and I know Santa definitely doesn't travel on a sleigh around the world, but that's my theory. But yeah, it came, food's always been left out for the Fae, I suppose, in many different traditions, and it's still ongoing. In contrast, sometimes fairies provided food to humans. Stories of the Great Irish Hunger, 1840s, tells of food being found in abandoned fields, saving families from starvation. Usually, food discoloured in such circumstances was thought to be cursed, but hunger won over sensibility. Later 19th century, some people expressed the view that fairies did not eat and drink in the same way as humans, but relied on magnetism of flower scents and similar sort of any kind of sense, I suppose, like the energy, the essence of what it is. So if you offered it a Fae, what they would do instead of taking the actual item is they take the essence from it. What is left behind, just, it's not nice, It's not what you actually gave them. It's not the same, so to speak. It would be completely rancid to